Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of Podio Commentary. My name is Matt Jarbo, and today we're going to be talking about the seminal classic. And I'm going to use that word unironically, classic. 1983 horror movie, Sleepaway Camp. This movie has an iconic ending. I'm just going to start off by saying that probably, as far as slasher movies go, the most iconic ending. You don't really see it coming. When I saw this movie for the first time the other day, I already knew about the ending. It was still pretty shocking when I finally saw it entirely in context. But I have to say, I went on a marathon of all the movies, and I'm going to talk about the other two films as well. I haven't done Sleepaway Camp 4 or Return to Sleepaway Camp, largely because they're kind of hard to find, and Sleepaway Camp 4 apparently is not even really much of a movie. But Sleepaway Camp 2, Unhappy Campers, and Sleepaway Camp 3, Teenage Wasteland, will definitely be something that I'll be talking about here on the podcast. But man, let me give you a quick background on my history with this franchise, because the only one I had seen up until this point was Sleepaway Camp 3, and I had seen it twice. I never saw part 2, and I never saw part 1. Mostly because I was never in a position to watch part 2 or part 1 in any capacity and have it be a conscious thing. But when I was a kid, I saw Sleepaway Camp 3 at a sleepover at a friend's house, and the movie stuck with me. It scared the crap out of me as a kid. Then I watched it again back in 2013 on Halloween night, realizing that I was an idiot as a kid. And so when I was surfing through Tubi the other night looking for something to watch, something lighthearted to just kind of end the night with, I ended up seeing Sleepaway Camp and going like, oh, wow, it's only like an hour and 20 minutes, right? It's not that long. I can give this thing a watch. Sure, yeah, all right, let's go. Let's put it on. Let's see what this whole movie's about. Because my only frame of reference was the third movie, I kind of expected it to be maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, a little bit more comical, a little bit more playful. Turns out I was completely wrong. This is a straightforward movie. And all things considered, it's actually a pretty solid one at that. Now, this movie was written and directed by Robert Hiltzik, who also went on to go and do Teenage Wasteland. No, he didn't direct Teenage Wasteland 2 or 3, and you can totally tell on that one. But he did come back for Return to Sleepaway Camp. And that was, I am going to give a watch, and I'll talk about it at some point in time. But this movie was an idea that he had that came from his experiences going to summer camp when he was a kid. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that when he went to summer camp back in the day, there was very little adult supervision. And when you're watching this movie, that plays out in so many ways. Because you've got the kids doing stuff that probably would get them in trouble in most scenarios. Like at one point in the movie, a bunch of like the jockey type guys are all playing water balloon fight on the roof of a cabin. How is that even in any way remotely safe? My 42-year-old ass was looking at that going like, someone's going to fall and someone is going to get really injured, right? And then even the owner of the camp, he didn't really care about that. He didn't care about that at all. He just wanted the optics to be good. But by that point in time in the film, the optics were not good. Things are going a little bit crazy, and he was kind of losing his mind. You have to kind of enjoy the descent into madness on that one. But when it came to Robert's own history, like he liked the idea that the kids were kind of left to their own devices, and he incorporated that into the movie itself. His goal was to create a horror movie that was both engaging and different from like your typical slasher movie, focusing on letting the kids have some fun rather than depicting the killer as just targeting counselors, kind of like Friday the 13th, right? And in this movie, there's a lot of times in the film where the kids are just being kids. Kids of a certain age, I guess, the early 80s. That mentality of just kind of like carefree summer. The guys are all trying to get laid. The girls are trying to get a tan. All of those little kind of things you would see, that you would expect to see, I should say. But when Robert wanted to make this movie, this specific film, he made the very conscious choice to kind of like make it a horror movie largely based upon economic considerations. Horror movies have the best rate of return for literally like any genre out there. You can drop a couple $1,000,000, if that, on a decent slasher with decent characters and some good gore, and you can make so much money. Look at like Blair Witch Project, $27,000 to film it. Never mind all the post-production work and everything else that went into getting it to the silver screen, but still, that was minimal in comparison to the $185 million that thing took home in 1999. So these kind of movies did very well. Never mind the home video market back then was a big factor. I talked about this in the Waxworks episode of Podio Commentary, where one of the reasons why they were able to do Waxworks 2 is because Waxworks did so well on home video, and those tapes were selling for the MSRP recommended price at that time of about $99.99, just to give you an idea of home video prices back in the 80s and 90s. It was insane. DVDs kind of destroyed all that because they're super cheap to make, but VHSs surprisingly were a very expensive platform. But one of the things he also wanted to do with this movie is he wanted to approach it from the perspective of having an ending that was really, really going to be memorable and was really going to make people talk about it. When I first heard of this movie, I remember being at the video store and picking up the case and reading the back of the case. And it's that letter that the kid is writing home to his parents, writing about how other kids have been getting killed and things like that. And then at the end of it, it's all like, I think I hear someone behind me, and then there's blood spatter on it. That is memorable, especially to a kid, man, because I went camping. I was in scouts, all that stuff. It kind of spoke to me on that level. I was like, oh, this is one of the reasons why I avoided it for so many years, because I knew it was going to scare the crap out of me. Now, as an adult with children of my own that are almost, 5 and 7, but they're nowhere near summer camp age, and we're not really doing summer camps anymore necessarily. It's like, I wish I would have watched it when I was younger to get that scare, to get that adrenaline. But other than that, I mean, I did very much enjoy my time with this. Now, one of the things that Robert here wanted to do is he did believe that setting the horror movie in a single location would be very cost effective and then help get the movie a good chance at getting distributed, which is a pretty solid idea. And he also wanted to make sure that he didn't really take inspiration from other slasher films at the time. I mean, there's no way to look at the 1980 Friday the 13th and then look at 1983 Sleepaway Camp and go, there's not some overlap here. Even though they're tonally speaking similar, or genre speaking similar, tonally they're different. And I feel like even though Robert here is a big fan of science fiction and good horror movies and movies that make you think and think real hard, at the end of the day, his goal was to craft something that would be memorable and keep audiences talking. And considering the fact that the ending is that expression, that expression on Felissa Rose's face is iconic, and it will absolutely positively just grind itself into your brain. It just gets in there. That open gape mouth, a jaw, whatever, like a jar look on her face is just like, it's real, it's real interesting. Never mind the fact, I will also say that I felt the score by Edward Belaus was good. I feel it really kind of added tension to the scenes where you knew someone was going to die or something bad was going to happen. And I think it kind of really added to some of that stuff, because I felt it kind of kept it moving, and it really kind of built the tension, because you kind of knew, like, when you go into a movie like this, that lots of people are going to die. So the tension buildup is really kind of minimal. And the way that the people died in this movie were like, I would say like not necessarily gory. I mean, there was gore, there was definitely violence and blood and mayhem and all that stuff. But the sequels went way further with the violence level than this one. It's very similar to, well, not, I don't want to say very similar to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a lot of that is all done through sound design and very impeccable directing and editing that really allowed the idea of Leatherface and the family to build up. So when somebody died, even though it was largely bloodless, you felt the crazy, or you felt all that stuff, right? You felt everything going on in there. And it was something that was like really impactful for telling this kind of story. Now, the movie itself had a budget of $350,000. And for 1982, when they filmed it, that was definitely like that was a good budget, a good minimal budget for something like this. But they shot it at in Argyle, New York, near Summit Lake at a camp formerly known as Camp Algonquin. And the movie was filmed during 5 weeks in September 1982 and ending in October. And they had actually, according to Wikipedia here, they had storyboarded the entire film, but after the first day of filming, it was already behind schedule. So they couldn't use the storyboards that they had made, so they basically just kind of crumpled them up, threw them out, and, decided to just kind of like shoot it by the seat of their pants, which worked out quite well. Additionally, because this was meant to take place during the summer, one of the things, I guess, in the background is that some of the trees were already starting to turn because it was fall. And so if you notice that little detail, which I didn't know, if I ever watch this movie again, I'll definitely keep that in the back of my mind. But it's interesting that when they shoot movies like this, they wanted to shoot it at a summer camp that was, not being used, but still at a time when you could almost make it seem like it was a summer camp. And that is just, everything involving this movie. But again, getting into the story of this film, my God, this film is so interesting because, it obviously starts up with the setup, right? You've got 1975, John Baker and his children are on a boat, and they're out there, and the boat capsizes, and then you have like a reckless, teenager driving a speedboat that has a skier on the back because like she's flirting with the camp counselor, and they end up like, not paying attention and end up running over the boat and killing the dad, as well as killing one of the siblings. You think that it's the boy, you think that it's Peter, and that Angela's the survivor. And what's interesting about that though is there's a bit there with another guy named Lenny who's trying to like get John back to the shore because they have a meeting. And, you find out later on that they're lovers. And that was kind of like interesting as well, because like this movie like touches upon like childhood trauma in that sense. And then maybe that leads into the whole idea of Angela and Paul later on, right? Because then we go, 8 years later, and Angela is now living with her aunt, who's a doctor. Okay, what kind of doctor was this? That's my question. What kind of doctor was Martha Thomas? Because that lady is flat out insane. She talks to herself. She's very over the top, very kind of crazy. And I feel like the actress did a really good job with that one there. Her name is Desiree Gould. She was just kind of like, you look at her and the way she performed, you're thinking like, this is someone who belongs in a mental institution, not raising two children. But Angela is very introverted. She's very quiet, very shy. And then her cousin, Ricky, is way more outgoing. But he's super protective of Angela. He's super protective of her. And they go to summer camp, and, she had gone, or Ricky had gone before Angela hadn't gone. They never really explain why that is. But, Ricky's kind of known. He's like he's a loudmouth, hothead. Wants to get with Judy, the hottest girl at the summer camp that he had hooked up with the year before, but now she's got bigger boobs and she's the talk of the town and flirting with all the boys and whatever. But she's got a real mean jealous streak too, which is really interesting. And then you got Paul, Ricky's best friend, and he's really supportive, and he starts to have a thing for Angela, which is kind of funny because it's like, you could tell Paul's more of maybe like the sensitive guy, and here's like this quiet, shy girl that's getting picked on by other girls that are inside her cabin because she doesn't shower with them and she doesn't like really talk to them, or she doesn't really want to eat. And she's very, very, very introverted that is until Paul kind of brings it out of her. And I don't know what it is really about Paul that did it, because it's like Paul seems like just this nice guy. And he genuinely seems to care, and he genuinely seems empathetic, and he just wants to kind of get to know Angela. And he's also a young kid, and he's trying to come into his own, and he's not interested in like Judy, even though Judy is exceptionally jealous of the fact that Paul fancies Angela, because Judy has a lot of deep-rooted insecurities herself, which, to be fair, they're never actually explained. Like, but through the actress's performance, through Karen Field's performance as Judy, you do get a few moments where she gets rejected and she reflects it in her eyes. And I thought that was really interesting, because it's like she is a multi-layered character. Sure, she's a grade A bitch, a super see you next Tuesday. And that is her character when she's trying to put the front on. She wants to kind of be slutty so then the guys pay attention to her. She wants the girls to want to be her. She wants all of those things. But when she gets rejected, she doesn't like it. And that's when she starts really picking on Angela. And anyone who really starts picking on Angela ends up getting confronted by Ricky. But what I thought was really interesting was this, the first attempt at a kill. Because Angela, as we see in the later movies, I don't think is largely psychotic until pushed, right? It's the torment, it's the torture, it's the constant belittling, the taking advantage of, things like that trigger her, push her to do some stuff. But in this particular case, what we have is the chef, right? And this guy attempts to molest her. He brings her into the walk-in freezer, and he starts undoing his belt, and he starts talking like Matthew McConaughey in Dazed and Confused a little bit, but not talking about teenagers, but like legitimately talking about preteens, and then like everyone's just kind of like ha 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 ha, but he tries to more or less molest her. Ricky runs in, saves her. And then later on, he gets pushed into a boiling pot of water, or having it fall on him. And then he gets significant, third-degree burns. And his eyes might be blind and everything like that. And then he goes away, and the owner's like, okay, just don't tell anyone about this, right? Let's just make, he had an accident. Accidents happen. I'm going to give all you workers an extra $15 a week to kind of keep this quiet. And he promotes the other guy to like kind of head chef, and to give him an extra $50 a week to kind of like make it all kind of go away, sort of thing. And I really kind of enjoyed that aspect from the owner, because you can tell he's just trying to protect his investment. And it comes across as, again, as this kind of slow boil, as all of a sudden like more students start dying and more people start getting injured, and he can't really like he can't tell anybody about it, and he doesn't want the optics to be bad, so he doesn't want people to go home, because he doesn't want there to be any kind of negative association. He wants to keep running the camp. He thinks his business is over, so he's got his own like financial motivations to keep everything afloat. But that causes him to start thinking that Ricky is the killer. And obviously the movie is trying to kind of like frame that as being the case. Like, we never see who the killer is. We only see the back of their head. They have dark hair. They're clearly someone younger, so it could be Ricky. But obviously Ricky would just go out and do it on his own. Like, he's that kind of like boisterous person. He's so hot-tempered. He wouldn't, wait for someone to get capsized on a canoe and then swim out there while they're underneath the canoe and then drown them. He would just like roll on up and hit the guy in the face with an oar and knock him into the lake and then let the guy drown on his own. Like, that's kind of the way Ricky would be. So I felt like that specific type of framing and setup for the story didn't necessarily work. But what I thought really did work, though, was the relationship between Paul and Angela, because Paul was like, he's a 13-year-old guy, 14-year-old kid. He's got his hormones, and he like gets Angela to come out of her shell. The only person she really speaks to initially is Paul. So you can tell she's got feelings for him, like really deep feelings for him. And then as he's trying to like talk, as he's trying to like, get some, is the best way to describe it. She's like, no, I'm not ready. I don't want this and whatever. And then, but he also is like kind of doing that dumb boy thing of, well, I want it. This is what I want. What about what I want, sort of thing. And that doesn't always work because that's going to get it, into a lot of trouble. Well, when Paul kisses her, it flashes back to when she was a kid and she walks in on her dad and Lenny like having sex or at least being intimate. And, like it seems kind of weird. Like that was kind of a weird scene to add in there. Cause then it ties in like, okay, the guys in the beginning, they were definitely boyfriends when that wasn't explicitly like described in the opening scenes of the movie. But now they're making out in bed and you're like, okay. Like obviously that is gonna have some trauma on a child when it comes to intimacy. But being them being gay is not, in the 80s, it was like, not that it wasn't as accepted as it is today, right? Like not mainstream. So I don't quite know what he was inferring with that outside of just trying to establish it as being something that is sinful and that would be traumatic. I talked about this in one of my Substack articles where I was talking about how horror is like intrinsically queer, but also like devilishly, moralistic. So you have your liberal and you have your conservative side of it. It's very odd. And, like the usually the heroes are like the more pious, the more morally driven people. And so that might be kind of leading to that, right? Like, oh, if these people if they hook up, they're going to be sinful and that's going to be, okay then for the killer to kill them. And they're maybe teasing the audience about that. Although granted, these are like, early teenagers. So I'm not trying to go too heavy into that particular line of thinking. But again, hormones are hormones and kids, teens are going to be teens, especially at summer camp. So it's kind of like whatever. But what I thought to be the most fascinating though, again, was like how Judy was when it came to Paul, because, Ricky liked Judy and Ricky was trying to get back with Judy, but Judy didn't want that. She wanted what she couldn't have. And because she was, frustrated with the attention that Angela was getting because Angela is, mute, not saying or eating anything, when she sees her with Paul, she decides to like, basically use Paul's hormones against him by seducing him and taking him out into the woods. And, because Paul tried to kiss Angela, Angela turned him down. And here comes Judy like, I'll suck face, and he's like, okay, right? Because like, he's an idiot. He's an idiot. When you're younger and the blood starts flowing elsewhere, you become a bit of a moron. And then Angela sees it and she gets mad. And Paul keeps trying to like apologize, but you can tell that he really hurt her. And I think this is what sets Angela off. Because as around this time, Meg gets killed in the shower, although we do find out that Meg was going to go sleep with the camp owner. I guess she's got a thing for older guys, a lot of daddy issues there. She gets killed. The camp owner gets an arrow in the neck. There's a part where like a bunch of kids threw sand at Angela as she was after she got thrown into the lake. And then those kids go on a camping trip out to kind of go sleep under the stars. And Angela goes out there, finds the hatchet. We don't see this happen, but like she hatchets 4 of those kids and then goes back, and is basically just starting to kill a lot of other people. From there, she tells Paul, like, go meet me at the lake, and Paul goes there. And at this point, you've got like the police are coming on in. You've got the counselors that are trying to like save the kids, figure out what's going on. Oh, I didn't even mention Judy's death. Judy gets it the worst in the whole movie. Because she gets punched out by Angela, who we can now kind of see dressed like Ricky, but definitely with like that male physique, and punches out Judy and then like holds her down, puts a pillow over her head, takes a hot curling iron and just inserts it into her hoo-ha, and then kills her that way. Internal trauma. That is like very sexual and very deliberate. And I thought that was interesting, right? But then we get to the end of the movie, we get to Paul, and the counselors come up on the beach, and they see Angela, and she's topless, sitting down, and she's like cradling Paul, and she's naked actually. She's cradling Paul, and she beheaded him. And then she stands up and she drops his head and she holds up the knife. And then we get the full body shot. And she's got the chest hair, she's got the pubes, and she's got the full ween on display. And then there's just that gaping look of, and everyone's all, right. And then like, that's where, she's hissing and growling, and then the movie ends. And it's a shocking crying game style of ending. And it worked really well for what they were trying to do for this specific film. So it ends, and I'm just sitting there going like, okay, yeah, that was impactful. Yeah, that was definitely impactful. I think that was a good job. That was very good. It got she butchered so many people. And then, like, what got me though was the owner, before he died, thought Ricky did everything. And the owner like thought he killed Ricky. And then she kills the owner probably for attacking Ricky, because she shoots him in the neck with an arrow. But then Ricky wakes up and he's not dead, but they find out that Angela is actually Peter, and the aunt had not already had a boy and wanted to have a girl, and then forced Peter to become Angela. And that right now in today's climate, that's definitely an interesting way of looking at things. I don't know if this movie was released today, if it would have the same cultural impact that it had back then, because back then was shocking. This would be shocking too, but it would be all over TikTok. It would be all over Twitter, all over social media, and everyone would just be going off about it. And you'd be like, you already know that at the end of the movie, it's a boy. You'd know that within the first day. But would you still go and see it knowing that at the end, it was really, this situation, right? And but the thing I want to go back to real quick is why I think, Judy and Paul got it the worst, really. Because Judy got it because it was revenge. Paul got it because he hurt her. And that hurting of her is what triggered the full-on massacre, right? The other kids that were mean to her were getting it, but like she went full-blown. And that's even carried on in the next two movies, where like the body count just massively, massively increases. But this one kept it pretty straightforward and engaging and interesting. And it's short enough to where it's entirely okay, right? It's entirely okay that it's the length that it is. And I enjoyed watching it. Now, the movie did come out November 18th, 1983. And it did 90,000 during its opening weekend. But by June 10th, 1984, because it premiered entirely, in May of 1984, but it premiered early on in 1983, probably to help get some of the buzz going about it. But the movie, within only a few months of its release, became one of the top 20 highest grossing films at the U.S. box office that week. So it wasn't a runaway hit. You know what I mean? It wasn't a sleeper hit. It was okay, it did modest, but by the end of its theatrical run, it went on to gross a total of $11 million off of a $350,000 budget. And that is something that I feel means is pretty successful, right? That's a pretty big return. Now, when the movie came out, there was a lot of comparisons to Friday the 13th, as I mentioned before. In fact, a review in the Courier Journal characterized it as a low-budget slasher in the Friday the 13th mold with teenage mayhem at a summer camp. I mean, that seems largely correct. But, it still had its own voice, and it still had its own whodunit and its own, final girl, because we thought that the final girl actually ended up being the killer. That's a big twist. Right? It wasn't the mom like Friday the 13th. But there was another one here from the Chula Vista Star News that says the film was deemed a tasteless picture about a mysterious murders at a summer youth camp that obscenely blends beheadings, stabbings, pubescent impulses, homosexuality, and transvestism. Because that was a word that was not as common as it was. I mean, even nowadays, transvestite is not even a word. But again, it's kind of like it worked, even though it largely got a lot of hate when it first came out. But that's how you know, right? That's how you know you're kind of over the mark. If you're trying to make something that has something to say, and you're doing it in a way that's going to be kind of over the top, and that's going to kind of be, more or less, like, I don't want to say satiristic, but if it's going to be something that is obscene enough to get people talking, if you get those kind of reviews, you're over the mark. But, Rotten Tomatoes right now has it listed at 81% of the 27 critical reviews were positive. And that's a lot for back then, considering nowadays on a big budget movie, you're going to see upwards of like between 200 to 400 reviews from Rotten Tomatoes, right? So, giving it a much broader take, even though I don't put any real faith in that. But I do give credit to the filmmaker for trying something bold and crazy that we probably wouldn't have seen at any other point in time. And even now, we still wouldn't see it. Now, if this movie came out now, it would be lauded as probably transphobic and all bigoted and discriminatory, and it downplays homosexuality and the trans experience. And obviously, with the way things are currently right now, I mean, look, this is February 2025. Amelia Perez, a movie about a transgender drug cartel kingpin who's trying to atone for her sins, is currently like the most nominated movie with 13 nominations. Never mind its crazy situation with its Oscar campaign at the moment. It would just not be seen the same way. But at the same time, I'm glad that it exists. It's a solid slasher, solid whodunit. It's not scary, but it keeps you on the edge of your seat and wondering where it's going to go next. And for that, I'm actually really happy that I've seen it. As for Sleepaway Camp 2 and Sleepaway Camp 3, well, I'm going to talk about those next, so stay tuned. Thank you guys very much for listening to this episode of Podio Commentary. You guys can find more from me at podiocommentary.substack.com. I will be building out some kind of website or something, but I do post articles, thoughts about what's going on in the industry and everything else over there. You can also head over to patreon.com/Matt Jarbo if you want to support the podcast, and if you want to get me to watch movies, you can do that as well. I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you again for listening.